I see I was muted. I'm doing well, thank you, and thanks for having me on. Thanks for sharing some time with me tonight. I'm very grateful.
That's great. I think we're just going to wait 5 minutes so we can get people on board here. If you want to talk about anything before they get here, that's fine. Or Dan can read something else from our newsletter.
Well, the newsletter sounded pretty good. I only caught the tail end of that, so I can't opine in the whole thing, but the back end sounded absolutely marvelous. Looking forward to seeing you all in New Jersey present.
Yeah, that's going to be a good time. It's gosh, it's like 2 weeks from now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's coming up. It's on a Sunday, I want to say. I want to say like March 3.
Yeah, March 3rd on a Sunday.
All
Yep,
good.
that's correct. So if anyone is on this meeting that's not familiar with what we're talking about, we're having a convention in New Brunswick, New Jersey. We're going to pick the delegates to go to Washington to vote for who they want to be the president, and I guess the national board and whatever else is going on in the party. So these guys will tell you more about that, and I'm sure that if you guys have any questions, they're all going to want to answer those questions. So feel free.
That sounds terrific. How many delegates does New Jersey send altogether?
We get 21 delegates this year.
That's a good number. Are you guys all going? Paul and Dan, you guys going?
I am definitely going. I had so much fun last time, and the entertainment was unbelievable.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah, I'm going to put in for it, and if everyone chooses to elect me, I'll go, and it should be a good time. I'd be honored to get a chance to go.
That's great. Well, maybe we can talk Kendall and Christopher and Dan and Ed and Eric into it as well.
If I go, it's from South Carolina because I recently moved.
Oh dear.
So looking at running against Nancy Macy down here for federal and getting myself involved in the state.
Good for you. Good for you. And thanks for doing it. Where in South Carolina are you, by the way?
Charleston, South Carolina, District 1. So.
Well, it's obviously a beautiful town.
Yeah. I'm on James Island. I love it. It'll be 4 years before I can run for mayor. They've only had a libertarian. They've only been in town since 2012 and voted for their second mayor. Their first one was a libertarian. So I found out you stand a chance down here. A libertarian got 47% of the vote. I'm like, how did he not win? They're like, because the Democrats don't run. At least on the state level. So
that's really interesting. Good luck with that. That's very exciting. Good luck.
Thank you.
And let everyone know about the progress, because that's the kind of thing that people outside of South Carolina get excited about. Hell,
Yeah.
I've driven to South Carolina for less.
Okay.
So you know what I find interesting is the border issue is turning into an absolute civil war in the Libertarian Party. It seemed like for a while, I'll be honest, just full disclosure, I've been just sitting back. I'm not, so I know I'm kind of like, I'm wondering where this is all going. It seems like, I don't know who has the best answer on this right now, because I'm not just going to, even though I am a Mises organizer, I don't just, I'm not going to just agree with what everything Rechtenwald said, even though he's pretty much right on most things. I can't wait to hear what Mike has to say on it. I personally hate the government because they always promise to do all this stuff on the border, and it never happens. Am I right?
You are right. I'm not a fan of, I'm a big fan of Michael Rechtenwald, so don't mishear me. I love Michael Rechtenwald, but I'm not a fan of this idea of shutting down the border, which is in effect what his suggested policy is. His suggested policy is you only let people through that have some personal invitation from someone who wants to, and some sense, take responsibility for individuals. I think that we need to recognize that immigration, and by that I mean legal immigration, is good for the United States. It's good for America culturally. It's good for us economically. It's good for us even in terms of fiscal management of the government, as long as you don't do something stupid like pass out free checks on the other side, which of course is something that we need to shut down completely. Not only is that a bad idea from a fiscal point of view, it's a bad idea from a social point of view, and an even dumber idea from the point of view of who it is that you think you're recruiting to come across the border as legal immigrants. You know, most people want to come to the United States to work. This idea of let's recruit people who want to come here for a check, I think is bass backwards. So I do believe that we need a much more pro-immigrant and more pro-immigration policy. That means treating with greater dignity the people that come across our border. That means two things, though, at the same time. It means that we need to recognize that illegal immigration is not good for the United States. We need to get control over our border, because what's happening down there, I spent a couple of days down there last year and came away really sadly impressed by the extent to which we have a humanitarian crisis down there with the human trafficking. That cannot stand. We need to shut that down. If we are libertarians and believe in protecting people's lives and property, if our government is worth a damn to do anything, and that's an open question whether our government is worth a damn to do anything. But if there's one thing that we ought to recognize we have a right to ask of our federal government, it is to protect people coming across the border. This idea of creating a black market, which is in effect what we have done. We have created a black market for human trafficking. People are coming to the border using coyotes and gangs, and they're using these high-tech apps on the other side and being sold into indentured servitude. That is a bad look. It's a bad policy. It's bad for the people coming across. It's bad for our culture in general. It's just bad every way you look at it, and we got to cut that out. Black markets kill. We know that from the war on drugs, and we know it from a number of other markets in the United States, not the least of which is prostitution, of course. Black markets take something that the culture doesn't like but is not ready to give up on and turns it into something really, really deadly. And that's what happens when the government gets involved and makes something ostensibly illegal, but then doesn't shut it down. So I think we need to get control over the border and do a better job of precluding people from coming in illegally. But that also means simultaneously doing a much better job of getting people in legally. I do believe that legal immigration is good for the United States. And that means that we're going to have to vet people through faster. This whole idea that it should take days and weeks and months and years to vet people across the border, that is absolutely moronic. It's just silliness of the highest order. If you're not on a list, if there's not a warrant out from your home government, and I recognize that there's a little bit of a technological lift that needs to take place here, but having said that, we need to get the technology in place to vet these people through quickly. If you're not on a list, you should be able to come through, and we should be telling you, rather than you can't work, we should be telling people, get to work. I'd be more comfortable than with the policy we have now. I'd be more comfortable if the policy says, I'm going to call you in 6 weeks and make sure you found a job, because we're not interested in people coming over here and not working.
Okay, sounds like we started. Let me just start this thing then. I think we got enough people. So my name is Paul Baratelli. I'm the New Jersey chair. I'd like to welcome Mike Termat. We appreciate you taking your time to come out and answer our questions. And what we're going to be doing is, for the first 20 minutes or so, you can give your speech, introduce yourself, tell us a little about yourself, and then after that, we'll be asking questions. So I leave the floor to you, Mike.
I appreciate that. And sorry, I launched in there a little bit early with how I feel about immigration, but it is an incredibly important topic. And by the way, one of the reasons why it's such an important topic, and I think it speaks to how we feel as libertarians, this is not this is not a numbers question, right? It's not a statistics question. It's not a dollars and cents type question. It's an ethical, it's a value type of proposition. It is reflective of how we feel about America as a culture and about how we feel about America as a nation. And I think that for this reason, we need to do a much better job of getting a handle on it. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important. And I think it's a real shame that so many politicians, especially on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, especially in the Republican Party, are leveraging what I would characterize as fear. I would characterize it largely as irrational fear of immigrants to make political hay out of this. And I think it's really repugnant. Look, the reason I'm in this race is because we have a huge opportunity in 2024. I think that we all recognize that. I think that we all recognize why that's so as well. But more than that, I think that we have an obligation. We recognize that what it is that has created the opportunity for us, I want to argue, is also what creates an obligation for us. We recognize that the opportunity comes from the fact that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are very likely to nominate individuals who are, let me see if I can put this gently, problematic. They are problematic personally. They are problematic from a policy point of view. And I think that each of these individuals has contributed significantly over the past 8 years, certainly, arguably longer, particularly in Biden's case, to the growing sense of authoritarianism in the United States. It used to be that the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, would pursue some political agenda that at least feigned an effort to align with American values. You used to be able to find an anti-war Democrat. You used to be able to find Democrats now and again that would stand up for your First Amendment rights, maybe not so much for your Second Amendment rights, but you would find Democrats who would stand up for reforming the way that police are managed in the United States. You used to be able to find Democrats that were truly socially liberal. That's all gone. The real thrust of the Democratic Party is to adopt as its number one priority keeping Republicans out of power. And I think the same thing can be said for the Republican Party. The number one agenda item is keeping Democrats out of power. It used to be, and I see some gray hair out there, you're with me, you know what I'm talking about. You used to be able to find a number of Republicans who are fiscally conservative, not so much anymore. You might be able to put your finger on a couple that you would argue are fiscally conservative, but as a party, boy, that ship has sailed. If you join the Republican Party out of some sense that party was going to stand up for free markets, less regulation, free trade, boy, you and the Republican Party have gone in two different directions. I know that's what happened to me. 30 and 40 years ago, I was a Republican, fiscally conservative. I'd grown up in the financial services industry, just went in two really radically different directions, and disappointingly so. And for all these reasons, it is an opportunity for us. As bad as the growing sense of authoritarianism is, it plays into our wheelhouse. We understand where authoritarianism comes from now in a democracy. And we used to believe that it couldn't possibly happen in the United States, right? We used to, in many cases, make fun of other countries that saw authoritarianism come to power. And we know it happens in a democracy when someone leverages fear to get voters to give an individual more power, saying what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties. What you really have to fear is that other idiot coming to power. And that's what we see from Republicans and Democrats now. Accusations of undermining democracy and accusations of undermining, voting legitimacy and all this crap. That's where it comes from. So having said that, while it is a huge opportunity for us, I think that if you're waiting for a Republican to lead the charge back to the Constitution, and for many of us, And I'm going to guess for some of us on this call, I see Ann Kaplan there, for example. Many of us would like to go beyond the Constitution, right? But if we're waiting for a Republican even to lead the charge back toward the Constitution, back to a democratic republic of delimited powers, yeah, I think you're waiting for something that's not going to happen. If you're waiting for a Democrat to lead that charge, I'm sorry, I just don't see it happening. I think it's up to us. And I think that for us to fulfill on that, and by the way, part of the reason that it's our obligation to do so is not merely because the other parties won't and don't, but let's be honest, we are the philosophical descendants of the people that put the Constitution together. We're the philosophical descendants of the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence that created our government in the first place for the sole legitimate reason of protecting our civil liberties. If we don't do it, no one else will. And for us to fulfill on that obligation, I think that we need to break from the past and do a couple of things significantly differently. And that's really why I'm in the race. The first thing that I think that we need to do differently is to run a very principles forward campaign. As you may have become aware, I'm running on a platform that we call the Gold New Deal. You can read about it at goldnewdeal.org. It's a collection of the most transformational libertarian proposals to fundamentally change the relationship between us and the government, especially the federal government, especially in the sense of decentralizing power, but also to change the relationship between us and state government and local government. I think Americans are ready to hear that. We need to run a platform that completely differentiates us from the other parties. I believe that we need to cleave a very hard edge against the Republican politicians and against the Democratic politicians. I believe that our past campaigns have sought too often, to too great an extent, to find common ground with Republican and Democratic politicians. I think that's exactly the wrong strategy. Find common ground with their voters, certainly. And most voters have a libertarian streak. We need to give them the chance to find us as the party whose principles better align with people's values than the Republican or Democratic parties' principles do, to the extent to which they have any principles at all. Most people wouldn't call themselves individuals who have a libertarian streak. I think most people in the United States can't spell libertarianism. But most people do believe in a set of values that aligns with our principles. I think most Americans are disappointed to have a foreign policy that does not align with their values. People recognize that we have a monetary policy in the United States that undermines their ability to make ends meet. People recognize that the amount of spending that takes place in the federal government has created a national debt that we're passing on to future generations. These are ethical problems. These are not just math problems, right? These are problems that offend people. The simple dignity of being able to raise your family the way you see fit, gone, taken from you. The simple dignity of, in too many counties and too many cities, of having a law enforcement agency that is managed in a way that aligns with your values, gone. So I think Americans are ready for a very libertarian, principles forward set of proposals and messages. I think it's the right thing to do to brand our party for the benefit of down ballot candidates. I ran for Congress a couple years ago. Boy, I learned that the value of the Libertarian Party brand was about zero. There are those who argue that in many places the value of our brand is negative, that you can get more votes running as an independent than you could as a member of the Libertarian Party. Ouch. So there's obviously a lot of work to do. I wish that past presidential cycles, we had campaigns that pushed our principles more, that did a better job of branding our party. So anyway, that's something I believe that we have to do in a very clear and crisp fashion. By the way, I also think it's the right thing to do strategically. If all you cared about was getting votes, if all you cared about was raising money and gaining media attention, if that's all you cared about, you would still have to recognize that running a very differentiated platform is the right move. Remember, we're not trying to convince 50% of America to vote for us. We're not even trying to convince 37%, which is what it would take to win a 3-person race. I don't have a particular number in mind. I recognize it's north of 3%, which we've achieved in the past. It's certainly north of the 1% that we got last time. But the object of the game is to disrupt the duopoly, to force them to take into consideration our values, our ideas, our principles, our proposals, our members, our votes. We need to disrupt and interrupt the Republican and Democratic Party's ability to just willy-nilly disregard the fact that we exist. We need to disrupt that. And that brings me to the second thing that I think that we need to do quite differently than we have in the past. And this is a big reason why I'm in the race. I believe that we have to run an extraordinarily professional and credible campaign. It's why we've already put together a team of 18 professionals now that are on our payroll. We don't pay them much, right? And I wouldn't argue that we're ready to go turnkey tomorrow for the general election, but we're damn close. We're way ahead of schedule compared to past cycles. And we're going to be very ready come Memorial Day. I believe that that is extremely important. The other element of that is to run a very credible campaign. I think most of you have seen our social media, our email campaign, our printed material, and our spoken words at events. I think you know that we work very hard at maintaining our credibility. Yes, we run with a very transformational platform, but we back that up with detail, we back that up with plans, and we lean very hard into my own personal background in public service and public policy, which is a big element of that. And I recognize that inside the Libertarian Party, a background in public policy and public service doesn't usually carry a lot of water. To be honest, even with me personally, it doesn't always carry a lot of water. But outside of our party, with American voters in general, there is a threshold of credibility that must be cleared for people to take a campaign seriously, especially with big donors and with big media, not only legacy media, but big new media. There's this threshold of credibility based on, can you actually compete? Because remember, this is not a philosophy seminar we're talking about. This is a competition. The only reason people are paying any attention at all is because they're curious who the next president of the United States is going to be. You could have the greatest philosophy in the world, but people aren't going to pay any attention if they don't think you're actually in the race. And why should they, by the way? You and I wouldn't pay much attention to a candidate who, you know, maybe they have an interesting philosophy. That's good. That's cute. That's worth, 60 seconds. But you're not going to pay a great deal of attention to the campaign. You're not going to follow that candidate if they just have no ability to affect the race. That's a waste of your time. And so we spend an effort leaning into my background. I was a professional economist for more than 2 decades. I've taught economics, including international finance and international trade at 3 different universities. I've worked for the White House as an economist for a couple of years. I worked as a professional advocate in Washington for almost a decade, advocating for freer markets, for greater competition, for less regulation. I had my own business for also nearly a decade in the business of providing education to financial services executives, mostly bankers, as well as strategic consulting to nonprofits and financial institutions. And then as a second career, I worked as a police officer for 11 and a half years, from age 49 to 60 in Broward County, Florida, until just a couple of years ago. Great experience, all as a registered libertarian, which, yes, leads to a number of interesting conversations and leads to a number of avenues for my own personal education as well as education of others around me, as you might imagine. And I had a good experience. One of the reasons I had a good experience was I picked an agency that had separate units for traffic and for vice, so I didn't have to get involved with the dopey war on drugs that I believe is hugely counterproductive. I didn't have to get involved with silly traffic unit requirements to meet quotas and raise money for the town and that kind of silliness. But being a cop, I got to be honest with you, if you weren't an economist before becoming a cop will turn you into an economist pretty quick because you see the effect of bad public policy up close and personal. You get to see how it affects the community that you care about, how it affects individuals, how it affects families that you care about. You get to see the effects of bad schooling because of the monopoly that our government imposes on a local level. You get to see the effects of bad zoning, bad housing, especially bad welfare policy, and most especially the war on drugs and what I would argue is the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. And it's one of the reasons why I talk so much about fundamentally changing the way that we manage police officers at the officer level, and how I believe that we need to change the way that we contract agencies at the law enforcement department level. So that's kind of what's going on. That's how I see it. That's why I'm in the race. That's a little bit about me. And I'm kind of curious what you all think of our party, how it's doing, and what you think the big issues will be later on this year.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
No, I'd just like to agree with, a lot of what he said. I've married 2 immigrants, and the second one I've been married 4.5 years. And while she can work here, she's still not here legally. And, at first I was for marijuana, and then I realized it's the whole drug war. So, I was just reading a lot of his platforms, and I agree with, 99% of what was said and what I read.
Kendall, I appreciate that. My contact information is on that website. So when you do bump into the 1% that gives you a heartburn, drop me a line. Maybe either I can change your mind or you can change mine, but either one, or maybe
No,
neither.
there's
But I'd love
nothing,
the
there's no
conversation.
changing. This country needs a third political party. And, last 2 years ago in New Jersey, we started with all 13, people running, and I'm the only libertarian here in South Carolina running for Congress. So, I found out you can do the state level at the same time. So, potentially a lot easier on the state level, going against Nancy Macy, who's been in the Citadel, and, all this woman, very tough to beat. But on the state level and the local level, I moved here with the intention of becoming mayor in 4 years, and I'm going to be taking Jack Welch's leadership certificate and then continuing on to get my master's in public administration after already having an accounting and a tax and a law degree. And 100% agree with you. Let's blow up the Board of Education.
That sounds terrific. Kendall, they do love the Citadel down there. I know that, and you're right to put your finger on that. And I'd like to ask you, or anyone else who can hear my voice, but it's going to be relevant for you. Do you believe that America is ready for a real crisp anti-war message? Or do you think that
Absolutely.
I might be a little bit delusional? And even if I'm delusional, that's okay. I'm still going to go out there and deliver the message, right? But I am a little bit optimistic that a lot of Americans are ready to hear that foreign aid is a bad idea, not only from an ethical point of view, but in terms of bang for your buck, that it's time to get out of NATO. It's time to clarify that we're not going to war over Taiwan and discourage investment there that we feel like we're tied to, and stay neutral in the Middle East. Do you think people are ready to hear it, or am I just rosy?
I don't know about people, but I'm ready to say this country should have been in 3 wars and 3 wars only. and that is the American Revolution, World War I, and World War II. You know, my father, I was conceived right before my father went off to Vietnam, and I don't care what kind of government you want to have in Vietnam. You know, I came up with potentially a great way for revenue because I'm 100%. You know, the Federal Reserve is worse than Uncle Sam, but they both have to go, and there has to be a way to figure out property taxes because even without the bank owning your home, there is nobody here in the United States that owns their house. And I haven't really looked at property taxes and fixing it, but if I end up the mayor of James Island, you know, we're going to figure something out, a casino someplace, or, you know, nobody wants to hear, especially in the Bible Belt, to legalize the first profession and tax it. The war on drugs, you were drinking Coke 100 years ago, and you still are with your sugar caffeinated water. And when you stop by Starbucks and you put sugar in your coffee, you're a double drug addict. So,
hey, don't pick on me.
Speaking of the war on drugs, follow up on that question, Mike. Now, I think that has a lot to do with the border situation too. So, if we have any prohibition whatsoever on anything, it's just going to create more of conflict on the border. Am I right? So you got to.
I agree with you 100%. Black markets are not only dangerous for the end user, which you learn pretty quick as a cop, right? That people are dying from overdoses by mistake, right? It's because they don't know what's in these products, and that's what happens in a black market where you don't have, you know, traditional trusted providers and that sort of thing like you do in a regular market. But it's also dangerous for the providers who are doing all kinds of crazy shit to get their stuff to market. And I'm not going to argue that these people are ethical. Don't mishear me. But it does lead to all kinds of mashugana on the border.
Yeah, that's true. I don't mean I got 5 or 6 questions I got written down. I can keep on going.
Go for it.
All right. If I see anyone else's hand up, I'm going to stop talking.
All right. You look great, man. Is that a picture of you?
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, dude, you're pretty.
That's not what I remember.
That's Brad Pitt in Fight Club. You guys know about that movie?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing it, but I remember, you know, whatever happens here stays here.
Daniel, there is no Fight Club.
That's right. So tomorrow, I think Julian Assange is having some sort of trial that if he doesn't win his court case, he's in big trouble. Now, my understanding of Julian Assange is that he came out with the WikiLeaks, 33,000 pages of whatever the Clintons did and all the money laundering going to Afghanistan war. Am I right?
Yes. And other topics. Yes.
So I was just going to bring that up. I don't know if you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, I do. I think it's real important that we back down from prosecuting people who are whistleblowers. The whole idea that we need law to protect whistleblowers, I think, is a real negative reflection on our government's character. I mean, that you should have to make explicit law to protect a whistleblower. Wow. That is really a condemnation of the character of people leading our government. But having said that, after the fact, you've got this guy being prosecuted for what? For bringing information to the world, to the American public? Holy cow. You know, one of the things that you didn't ask about this, but you got me pissed off. Give me 90 seconds here. The young man in the Air Force Reserves who last year decided to go public with the classified information on how the Ukraine war was going. I've forgotten his name already. You know who I mean, though. He's being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. And I get it. It was classified and that's naughty. But there's two things maybe three things that need to be said. Number one, it shouldn't have been classified. Number two, we need whistleblower status to protect people who release classified information if it's in the interest of the American public and shouldn't have been classified in the first place. And number three, wow, the material that was being disclosed that the U.S. government didn't want disclosed was how bad the war is going in Ukraine, right? Okay, let's think about this just for a moment. The Ukrainian government knew damned well how it was going. So you're not really pulling the wool over their eyes. The Russian government, they knew damned well how this was going. No one should purport to have been pulling the wool over their eyes. So exactly from whom was our government keeping this information? Us. The reason it was classified is because they didn't want the American public to know that the money being blown in Ukraine was not a good investment, in effect. Now, I don't mean to say that the conspiracy was explicit, like, let's sit around the table, we get embarrassed, and we decide to classify it. I'm sure it was classified as a matter of categorization, right? It's one of the things that we need to change about the way documents are classified in the federal government. But having said that, wow, that's a document that not only should not have been classified, it should have been on legacy media. It should have been published. That's the kind of thing that voters need to know. So I just think the whole thing is bass backwards. Sorry, you didn't ask about that, but keep going.
Well, since I don't see anyone else's hand up, I'll just keep on going. Ross Albright, and he was with the Silk Road. He started a website about 10 years ago.
Yeah, now that is an example where the government explicitly prosecuted the shit out of him because he embarrassed them. Let's be honest. He embarrassed them, and that's how he got such a huge sentence. That's what's going on there. That was close to what you would call a political hit job. Sending a message, right? He's being prosecuted not because what he did was so evil, but because he was doing it with such volume that he embarrassed the government, and I find that disgusting.
Yes,
by the way, that's a first day pardon. That's not a last day pardon. You know how presidents typically wait until the last day to pardon people because the political backlash. That's a day one pardon. I don't know how you. Honestly, I don't know how you live with yourself by letting that kid stay in jail because the government was embarrassed.
Oh.
That's repugnant.
Yeah, it's a shame because
Trump's gonna have to pardon himself day one. Do you pardon him? I mean, what was classified in his documents?
Well, good point. I think I don't know exactly what was in his documents, but let's talk about what happened yesterday or today. I lose track of time. This $353 million settlement ordered by this judge, Arthur Engoron. Wow. No victim, no damages. And don't mishear me. I'm no Trump fan. I was in New York in the 80s. I've got a long history of recognizing this guy is full of crap and an ethical outhouse. I mean, this is really a bad guy. So, let's not get confused over here. We're not standing up for Trump. We're standing up for the principle. No victim, no damages. In fact, there are banks out there who have leaked the fact that they would like this case to go away because they'd like to keep doing business with the Trump organization. No statute is being referenced as federal or state law that says that there's certain civil money penalties associated with this fraud. This is just a judge willy-nilly deciding he's going to go after this organization. No jury. I'm not saying that was illegal to go without a jury. I just think it's disgusting. and like I say, no law being referenced. Wow, that is, as they say, lawfare, right? That is really weaponizing the law. Nobody thinks that this would be done if he were not a political figure. And of course, this is the case where the prosecutor herself was on record before ever even conjuring up the case. I'm going to go after Trump. Wow. I mean, we are really looking like an authoritarian third world democracy at this point. Sorry, you didn't ask about that either. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Paul. I just had one question. So I worked for a regulatory body in the government for a while, and I had the honor of sitting next to our news person that handled the news. And while sitting there, I noticed that the guy was continually threatening the newspapers to sue them all the time. And of course, the newspapers are, trying to get the scoop on what's going on. They're putting out their information, their opinions. And what can we do to keep a free press in the United States, whereupon the government can't take all the millions of dollars that they get, which no newspaper or reporter ever has, and keep free speech going here? Keep the First Amendment the First Amendment.
Yeah, it's obviously a huge problem. Before I go off in another tirade, were the threats that you heard with the journalists, was it because this individual was frustrated that stuff was being leaked and then published, or was it because they were expressing either opinions or revealing facts that ran counter to the agency's positions?
These were published facts, and they were asking for retractions most of the time, and they would go after them. Personally, from where I was sitting, and I talked and I was in meetings with the whole thing, most of the information wasn't something I considered bad for the public. To be honest with you, I mean, there's a few things that the electrical industry can hide, kind of, but there's not many things.
Yeah.
You could like say my power lines don't go here. Here's where the control areas aren't. But they were more like someone had published something for free energy and they wanted it wiped out of there. Someone was publishing something on how to, everybody's worried about, a geomagnetic storm hitting the planet. And there was a bunch of scientists that came up with like the $10 fix for it, which was just to ground all the wires. And they said they're going to sue him over that. So there was a bunch of that kind of stuff over. And these little newspapers, well, I'm saying little, but they're probably $1 million newspapers. We're getting constantly, you retract that, you remove that, take that off your website.
Yeah, I get it. I've got first of all, there's so many layers that need to be addressed here. I personally have a problem with the government suing anybody. This is the kind of crap that leads to the civil trial that we just spoke about a moment ago, going after Donald Trump when there's no victim. The ability to sue a journalistic organization because you're unhappy about what's in there. At that point, I think that you've got to take it upon yourself to publish, and by yourself, I guess I'm referring to the agency, to make public and to publish what it is that you think is correct. And look, I've worked with trade press myself when I was in the financial services business. I had to spend a lot of time working with press, and I know press gets a lot of stuff wrong when it's technical material. I get that. It's frustrating, it's hard work, but we don't automatically turn to, and I'm going to sue you. That is a government thing. That's an authoritarian thing. That is the kind of knee-jerk reaction that I believe that we need to explicitly counter with legislation. I believe that we need FOIA reform, the Freedom of Information Act. I think that we need to, rather than rely so much on people filing requests, we need to do a much better job of requiring the government to proactively disclose information. Now, as you know, working in a regulatory agency, there are some rules they need to publish the counter opinions that came in during a certain period of time, and they need to publish proposed regs, and then it goes through, you know, a certain number of rounds of iteration. But they are not required by law to disclose a lot of the background analysis. And I think that that's a real problem. I think that it should be proactively required. And back to something that we discussed earlier, this whole business of classified information. A libertarian-minded administration, even if it's a lowercase l, libertarian-minded administration has to on day one say, I'm starting 12-month clock. At the end of 12 months, everything is going to be unclassified unless some agency can make its case specifically to the White House that this document, this group of documents, needs to be classified. In other words, the presumption has to be declassification, not classification. As you know, the vast majority of crap that's classified doesn't need to be. And the vast majority of crap that's classified is classified because of relatively automatic rules. You know, anything in this category, anything about this project, anything that, you know, this person said to that, it can't be that way. So I think that we need classification reform as a matter of, you know, the security rules with a presumption of declassification. I think that we need to change FOIA to force the government to put stuff out, and we need to streamline FOIA requests, which, as you know, are in too many cases, the government finds it easy to either stall or to say no. A lot of Americans don't realize the government often says no to FOIA requests, which is a real problem. You know, they'll claim that it doesn't fall under FOIA or it's classified. So there's a lot that we can do to make some headway.
Cool.
So we'll find out who killed Kennedy.
I think I know. Now, have you guys interviewed Jacob Hornberger, who's also seeking the nomination?
Yes, we have.
Okay. Well, that's too bad, because I was going to say, you really want to carve out a third of your discussion to talk about this. That guy,
he did a 45-minute video for us at the convention last year about JFK.
Awesome. If you have a link to that, send it to me. I interviewed him for about 40 minutes a couple weeks ago. By the way, you can see my interview up on our YouTube or up on our social media. The back half of that interview is about this. Fascinating. I got a lot of problem with his policies, you know, in this race, but I got to hand it to him. He is a real JFK expert, and I had come to the conclusion years ago that the CIA had a role. I don't know if you've seen the jailhouse confession, 2.5 hours long, by this guy whose name I don't remember now. I'm embarrassed to say, who claims he was the second shooter. As you might imagine, I've seen a lot of people make confessions in my prior profession. This guy struck me as incredibly credible. He was amazing. The level of detail, names, dates, where we were at certain times. And especially what made it credible to me was when he said he didn't know certain things. Like when someone said, why was so-and-so there? I don't know. You know, he just was. Why did the CIA back out at the last minute? I don't know. They just did. And my boss said, go ahead anyway. Fascinating stuff. So yeah, I am convinced that the CIA had a role, exactly the role I think we don't fully understand. But Hornberger's case is made on the autopsy. He wrote an entire book on the autopsy itself. That guy has deep expertise. He forgets more than I know about it.
Okay. Can I ask you one more question? I've noticed over for the course of probably 20 or 30 years, the family unit's been destroyed, or slowly being destroyed, or just getting rid of. What's your stance on how to repair the family unit and the concept of having family?
Yeah, there's a few things I think that need to be said about this, and I think that we need to be really careful. I believe that this is as important a topic as there is. I know this is going to sound a little melodramatic, but cut me some slack here. I think this is arguably as important a topic as there is for humanity. I believe that it is a foundational element to our culture, and it's going the wrong direction. And one of the things that scares me is the speed with which we saw this transformation. Initially in the African American community, and then in the everybody else community inside the United States, right behind it, right? Same pattern, just 15 years later, same exact pattern. It is utterly impossible for a change that's that fundamental, that's to something that deeply rooted in our culture, to take place that fast without there being really profound triggers in place, right? Because if you look before the 1960s, that just was not a thing. That was not a phenomenon. Black, white, immigrant, American born, that's just not happening in America, or parenthetically any place else, until beginning the 1960s, really taking off in the 70s, accelerating through the 80s. And I think there's a couple of things going on here. And look, there's no denying the fact that our culture has profoundly changed for reasons outside of public policy. And so there is a large extent to which we are going to necessarily have to exclude that from a public policy discussion. As libertarians, we all believe that, we all recognize that we can't use government to try to change culture. What we can do is fight against government instituting bad public policy that has contributed to our cultural problems, and I believe that we have in significant fashion. Some of those cultural factors that we can't really address through public policy, look, the invention of the birth control pill, the subsequent decline of the role of religion in our culture. Whether those two things are connected, I will leave to others to ponder. And then, of course, the entire advent of our pro-victimization culture, which really accelerated in this past generation. Having said that, there are bad public policies in place that have contributed mightily to the demise of the family. Starting with the bad public policy on a local level. As I mentioned earlier, bad schooling, bad zoning, bad housing, especially bad welfare policy, especially starting in the late 60s. You don't need to be an economist to recognize that when you subsidize a family remaining disintegrated, you're contributing to the disintegration of the family. This is something that should have been reversed a long time ago. Thankfully, it has dissipated to some extent, the role of bad federal welfare policy, but it still persists, and now it's too late. Putting that genie back in the bottle is exceedingly difficult. I might be optimistic that in the long run, and by long run, I don't even know what I mean by that, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 years, that the American family will repair. But it is not going to be something that happens over 100 weeks, right? I query whether we can make a bit of an impact over 100 months. I do believe it is a long-term challenge, is a cultural level challenge. For those who recognize it, I urge you to get involved. There are elements of the culture war that we should be involved with, not as a public policy matter, but as Americans who give a damn and recognize the problem.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, it's an incredibly important question.
I think so too.
So I guess I got a list of other questions I can ask here. We have two wars going on at once. Um, it looks like RFK Jr. is okay with one war, not the other. Um, and that's why he's not running for president with Dave Smith right now, pretty much. Um, I guess I could just leave it there. I could go to another question, but that first question was too much already, right? Two wars.
Look, I think, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? RFK is not going to be seeking the nomination of our party because the risk to him is too enormous that he might have his ass handed to him. And he's already got a strong brand. He's already got a shot at raising the $20 million he believes he needs to gain ballot access in 50 states. All of that would be at risk if he were to officially announce that he wanted the nomination of the Libertarian Party, and he got his ass handed to him by some economist, former cop that no one ever heard of. I mean, imagine it would be a disaster for them. And I happen to know that he engaged in important conversations with a consultant inside of our party who told him as much, explained what it would take to get the nomination. And I think everyone recognized that it was a seriously uphill climb. And so it's not impossible that he would still seek the nomination. I think that that's a very, very remote possibility. Look, he does seem to be okay with as much killing and warring in the Middle East as Israel wants to propagate. One of the problems besides the fact that I just disagree with the policy position, I think that we need to maintain neutrality in Israel, in the Middle East, and around the world. One of the problems I have with RFK Jr. is he doesn't seem to come at a lot of these problems from a position of principle. He seems to come to a lot of his conclusions ad hoc. I get the impression, for example, he's upset about vaccines because of the vaccines themselves, because of the science, because they don't work very well, because, a lot of things that we're upset about too, right? We don't like government involvement in giving the vaccine pharmaceutical development companies a free pass from litigation. We don't like the fact that government employees receive compensation while they're approving these drugs. We don't like the fact that the government lied to us. We don't like the fact that the government suppressed information. I could go on and on and on. But to us as libertarians, there's a much more important underlying principle going on, rather than the way the vaccines were developed sucks, as much as we would agree with that. And that is, let me offer a thought experiment just for a moment to illustrate my point. Imagine there was such a thing as a perfect vaccine. And you can probably already see where I'm going with this. Imagine there were a vaccine that if you were to take it, it'll save your life. If you don't take it, 100% you're going to die. 100%, it's been tested, long run, short run, no side effects, shuts down transmissibility completely. You get it's perfectly free, right? And we have enough of it for everybody. You got me so far. Thought experiment, perfect vaccine. If you don't take, let me remind you, if you don't take it, you're going to die. 100% you're going to die. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. The big question is, in such a situation, would a government have the moral authority, the ethical right? Should we allow a government to force someone to take the vaccine under coercion of losing your job or whatever else? The answer has to be no. As a libertarian, it doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter that it's good for you. It doesn't matter that you might be able to make an argument it's a good decision, right? It still remains none of your business as a government. And that's not the kind of thing that you're going to hear from RFK. You're going to hear, I don't like the vaccine mandates because I don't like the way the government handled it. I don't like the vaccines. And I get that impression from his foreign policy. I don't like wars because I don't like the particular situation. But in Israel, I like the particular situation and I'm all about it. That's a problem. And it's a problem because it speaks to the inability to predict how he's going to come down on a future conflict. Is this a guy that's going to lead us to or away from greater potential for World War III? And look, I get how we all feel about Israel. To a lot of us, this is personal, right? I've traveled all over Israel. I've sent my daughter to people's bat mitzvahs in Israel. I've traveled to Palestinian territories. I've traveled to Middle East with my son. I sent my son to train in Jordan. I've traveled, Morocco and the UAE and Egypt. I get it. There are people on our team with family there. There was a prominent member of our party who a few months ago said in social media that he lost a member of his family in Gaza. It's just heartbreaking stuff. And many of us have connections to Israel as a matter of faith, the Holy Land. I get it. This is, in many ways, personal. But I think that makes it, in some sense, all the more important that we work as a matter of principle. This is not a football game on which we should be asking ourselves which side to pick. This is a matter of taking money forcibly from people around the United States, no matter how you feel, including families who are among us the least able to afford it, taking that money and sending it abroad to support someone else's war. This is not a bang for your buck question. This is not an economics question. This is not a math problem. This is an ethics problem. And it has to be a matter of principle the way that we approach it. And I just don't get the impression that RFK is on board with that concept. But we as libertarians must be.
Mike, as far as websites, is this New Gold Deal your website, or is there other websites to look at or focus on?
There are 3 altogether. MikeTremont.com is the most difficult to spell because Tremont has 2 A's. But MikeTremont.com is the basic website for the campaign. It will link to goldnewdeal.org, which is where the platform is. And I think you'll like the platform. I think you'll enjoy seeing it. To a lot of us, it's libertarian bread and butter, right? It's good stuff. It's decentralization. It's getting control over school policy, about how we hold police accountable, shutting down ridiculous government spending, changing our monetary policy. It's good stuff.
And how do you spell that?
A little bit forward. Go ahead.
How do you spell that?
MikeTremont.com. You got the M-I-K-E part. My last name is T-E-R-M-A-A-T. So it's MikeTremont.com.
What nationality is that?
It's a Dutch name.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can also link from there to our new AI bot, our new artificial intelligence bot that we call Lisa, the Libertarian Intelligence System application. Lisa is an AI bot designed to answer questions the way a libertarian would. It's in beta. It's still under development. It gets better every week. It gets better every month. And the design, the point, its reason for being is to help spread libertarianism outside of our party, to help people learn a little bit about libertarianism by asking questions and having a conversation. It's a lot of fun. You guys should check it out. And because it is under development, if you find it saying something you don't agree with or something you think is dopey, let me know. It's very fun, though.
Okay, I have one question. One more question. This is my last question for the night. So obviously our 2A rights are being massively attacked, controlled. Um, I'm worried because I know for a very long time, my grandparents came from Italy and over in Europe, and they always taught me, once they start coming for the guns, they're obviously going to do something you don't like. What can we do to protect our 2A rights? Because again, the government has this massive amount of money, this war chest, and we have barely anything, to go after them. We have a few groups, GOA, the NRA has kind of been useless lately, and a few other fringe group first responders and the California Coalition. But what do we do to protect our 2A rights?
There's a lot to unpack there. By the way, I agree with you that when the government confiscates your guns, you're on the edge of something worse. That is a green light to, the government encroaching further on your civil liberties at some point in the future, whether explicitly or implicitly. And we do need to talk about the fact that I believe our government is headed toward a disaster in the next couple of decades. And I think that's one of the ways that it could be reached, but we'll come back to that topic. However, I don't think that you need to believe that that's true to recognize that we need to get better at protecting our Second Amendment rights. Even if you believed it was a here and now problem only, right? That should be enough to motivate us to protect our civil liberties, both because these are civil liberties that we want to protect, but also because a government that we can't stand up to in the context of the Second Amendment is a government that we can't stand up to in the context of other amendments. In other words, I think that our defeat in this area would bleed over to other areas. And for that reason, I think it's also important. So anyway, now that you and I have motivated each other sufficiently, your question was not that. Your question was how. I'm a big believer in coalitions. The idea that us as atomized individuals are going to be able to stand up to the federal government. You alluded to this point by saying they've got all these resources and we don't. That's exactly right. The political process is replete with examples of special interests, in effect, getting their way, whereas the bulk of Americans get screwed just because special interests are better organized. And in this case, it happens to be the government, specifically the federal government, but in all too many cases, state governments as well, for those of you who have been through California or Washington, D.C. Lately. So one is we need the NRA to get back on its feet. One is to protect and support coalitions at a local level and to encourage them to form coalitions at the national level. I do think that umbrella organizations have the potential for affecting federal legislation. Lobbying works. Lobbying works. I've spent enough time in Washington as a professional advocate to know that that is true. Whether you wish it were true or not is a different matter. But the truth is that lobbying does work. You can affect that. And to the extent to which we are all atomized and there's not much that we can do, there is an element of civil disobedience that needs to be maintained. We need to stand up against registration. We need to stand up against the idea that someone should be taking our weapons. I think we're all sympathetic to the motivations behind those who want to shut down, for example, mass shootings, right? There's no such thing as the mass shooting coalition, right? We're all against violence in our communities. But we need to make the case because it is true that weapons regulation would not do a damn thing to affect that problem. It's just not a weapons problem. on some level, you got to wish it were, right? I mean, we all wish there was something we could point to. We all wish that we could say, I figured it out. That's the thing that causes this. If we just address that thing, right, then we'll get it. Because at least then you're having a debate. At least then you're having a conversation. But the truth is, and we all need to be truth tellers, the truth is that gun regulation would not advance the cause of diminishing mass violence. That's just the truth. Now, there may be things that we can point to regarding mass shootings. There's no question there's a mental health aspect here to it. There's no question that there's a see something, say something aspect to it. We're now going to be, apparently we're going to be engaged in a national debate over the next decade about the extent to which we're going to hold parents accountable. That's a weird thing. That's a very weird thing. I think that we want to invite parents into the conversation. We want to have some sort of a mechanism, a vehicle for parents to raise their hand without thinking that they're throwing their kids under the bus. But holding, just as a matter of principle, holding one individual accountable for the crimes committed by another individual, even if it is your child, that is a bridge that I believe the American people are going to recognize as being too far. So we do need to have that conversation about creating a vehicle for parents to say something, because in all too many cases, these are very troubled juveniles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for your answer. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions? Because we're kind of at 9:40, went a little bit over.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I do tend to prattle on. I apologize.
Oh, they were all very good answers. I'm sure people will enjoy them. A few people couldn't make it, and they'll be watching it later on our YouTube channel.
Sure. And, let people know, Mike at MikeTremont.com. Of course, you'd have to spell it, but, drop me a line and let me know, particularly if you have a question, but, if you disagree with something, right? As I mentioned earlier, let's talk about it.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for coming out, Mike. We definitely appreciate it. Thanks, Irene, for helping set this up. We definitely appreciate you too.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you. It's nice to see you guys. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Irene, I'm working on Irene to come to the New Jersey convention. Do we have a commitment there yet, Irene?
I'm speaking.
It's a big deal. And Irene, I didn't mention this to you earlier, but Evan, our social media kid, wants to come to the New Jersey convention as well. Evan was at the New Jersey convention last year and said that he met a lot of nice people. I don't know who the hell he was talking about. He said he met a hell of a lot of nice people and he wanted to come again. So I told him that you would foot his bill to come out.
Okay. He only lives in New York City. So me or them, I'll foot his bill.
We'll get Paul to do it.
You're getting all three of us guys and some other people at your convention. And I don't know, I have this affinity for the New Jersey crew. So I'm looking forward to it.
No, we're going to do it right. We're going to bring the fancy tablecloth and we're going to sell books. We're going to have branded t-shirts. It's a party.
All right. Sounds great.
And Mike, when or if do you get down here to South Carolina?
And we're going to come down to South Carolina again. We were there for the convention, of course, but I would love to come down, particularly if you had an affiliate that was having a meeting. Next time I need to come south. I still got family in Florida, so every once in a while I find myself driving 95. I would love an excuse to lay over in South Carolina.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, we can work it out. I've only went to one meeting. They had definitely more than 10 people there. So not too bad.
10 people,
but nobody running in South Carolina. So
the expressway. All right. Thanks, Kendall.
So
This was great, guys. Great turnout. Thank you so much for organizing it.
You're welcome. It was a lot of fun. I love finding out about the more I do this, the more I like I'm enjoying finding out more about the candidates and their positions.
Yeah, it's fun. To be honest, I have enjoyed more than I anticipated getting to know the other fellas as well. I mentioned to you the books that Hornberger has written about JFK. A lot of fun. I got to meet Joshua Smith's 7 kids, which was a tremendous treat. And as I mentioned, I got to meet and get to know quite well by this point Michael Rechtenwald, and I've read a lot of his one of his most recent books. So it's been a lot of fun. And I've been on so many airplanes with Lars Mapstead and Chase Oliver that I think that we should be planning travel together at this point.
Awesome. All right.
It's a good look to see a candidate when the candidates start bickering with each other, it just doesn't look good too much to a lot of people. And there's
Yeah.
a difference between bickering with each other and debating policy.
There is a difference. That's well said, Daniel. That's well said. I got a series of interviews with these goofballs on my social media. You should check them out. They're actually very fun.
Yeah, they really are. Very interesting.
They're fun. All right, you guys take care.
I'll check it out.
Good night. Thanks for this.
Yeah,
Thanks a
I'll
lot.
check it out. Have a good
Mike,
night.
thanks. Good talking to you, Mike. Thank you.
Good to see you again, Dan.
See you guys in a week or two.